I was just going to say by way of introduction, because we have a guest, that this is a class that was studying the whole concept of discernment and judgment, because there's over 20 Hebrew and Greek words for judgment and discernment. And they run the spectrum from just discerning between good and evil on one end, clean and unclean, holy and unholy, to eternal damnation on the other end, and a wide girth in between. So we studied a lot of those different words. And first we looked at how we are to judge ourselves. Because there's only 3 areas we are even allowed to really lend our discernment to, and it starts with us. We have to be self-reflective, and that's why the memorial service in remembrance of me is so important every week, is that this is an opportunity for us to realign and recalibrate ourselves to the Lord. And then if we can develop a godly conscience, which was what we studied last week, then we can really truthfully look at ourselves in a real light, and then our families, which we're responsible for discerning for, and lastly, the ecclesia. And we're going to get into the verses. We did get into 1 Corinthians 13, verse 31, which in that part says, if you judged yourselves rightly, you would never be condemned or never be judged. Very powerful verse, because it puts that power right in your own hands. If you don't want to be condemned, if you don't want to be judged, then you do it. Take the responsibility to look at yourself and to recalibrate. I don't know about you, but I find lots of things wrong with myself every week. So there's lots of recalibration and trying to fix things. So I'm going to burn down through some of these really quickly, because I was updating this with size, but it's about judging ourselves rightly, and it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 31. And then we talked about realigning ourselves every week, and the whole chapter of 1 Corinthians 11, and that it's a time for us to discern our own lives and how we can serve each other better. And then we talked about being proactive and letting the Lord search through us. So I'm going to go down to where we are now, if I can get there. So this was last week. We talked about gaining a godly conscience. I'm going to skip down to the summary to show you again what we talked about. Next one more slide. Okay. So consciously abiding in the Word to renew our mind, inviting Christ and the Lord to examine us and to be part of the decision-making process to purify our lives. And with every decision we make, invite Him on the decision-making process, and to expunge pride, because it seems to be the one thing, that and stubbornness, that the Lord can't really work with. It's like hard clay. You can't mold it. You can't manipulate it anymore. 6, not being self-justified, but leaving room for God's justification. What did we say self-justification was last week? It's a roadblock to God's mercy. It stands in the way of Him being able to show us mercy and grace. Why do we need mercy and grace if we've self-justified? Right? I mean, why do we need it? It's not even part of the equation. Lastly, to examine ourselves against the fruits of righteousness versus the fruits of the flesh. So Christ says, by their fruits you shall know them. So for each of us, let's look at our fruit. What have we done? What have we said through the week? And what have we thought that helps us to be good at self-examining? And then we talked about these things, about not merely listening but doing. And then we got into the family and talked about a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A lot of people think that last phrase means a brother is adversity and problems in your life. But what it's actually saying is that when you really get into difficult times and things are really, really bad, you should be able to count on your brother or sister closely of all. Did any of you all have any comments on that? I don't remember from last week, but if not, I'll move on. I'm sorry? Oh, you didn't? Okay, I'm sorry. So, okay, the summary was as far as you got? So we're caught up. Okay, so post self-examination and introspection, Meditation and self-correction is our primary responsibility for each of us to do ourselves first, and then we are capable of helping someone else out. And that goes along with that whole parable about first pull the mote out of your own eye so you can see clearly to take the speck out of someone else's. The drive of all of this is the world wants you to be numb up here. They don't want you thinking anymore. They don't want you perceiving anymore. Any kind of perception is viewed as being judgmental, okay? It doesn't work in science, it doesn't work in math, it doesn't work in English or any other medium, but in life, they want you to think this way now. And secular humanism has become completely embedded. So, Randy, yes.
The problem with that is that the ones who don't want you to be judgmental are the most judgmental people of all.
That's great. What, can you want to explain that?
Well, they're very judgmental against anybody who doesn't think like they think. They don't consider a different view to have equal validity. It's their view or nothing.
Right, exactly. So they're very intolerant of anyone else's thinking on this. And also, in rightly judging families, there's a dynamic that happens in all churches over the whole world, which is when a crisis arises in a church, in a chapel, in an ecclesia, and there's a dividing line. Where does the dividing line usually fall when a church winds up splitting? Whether it's Pentecostal, Methodist, whatever. What causes the rift? And what causes, and what's the cleavage plane in the ecclesia?
My experience and from my father's stories of the past, it's usually down family lines.
Exactly, Roger. Exactly. And you see it over and over and over again. If we were to be truthful and we were to look back at our own community over the last 100 years, any of the divisions and splits that happened, how did they fall? Along family lines. Which proves what? That the blood of family is thicker than the blood of Christ. That's what's really being said when those things happen. What should be said is the blood of Christ is all inclusive, and it's more thick than the blood of family. Because really, when you do that, when you divide along family lines rather than Christ's lines, then you're saying to Christ what? What is the statement you're making? Go ahead, Rob. I just think that's absolutely true. He's second and what?
He is second.
Yeah. Yep, he's second in the relationships to the Lord. So these cleavage planes we used to talk about in geology. So on a piece of slate, have you all ever been out to Buckingham County slate factory or whatever? Okay, well, it's amazing, and they make the finest slate in the world. It's right here in Virginia, and we literally have Virginia slate that's been used in the House of Commons and the House of Lords in England. But if you take a piece of slate on its end and you just put a chisel right on the edge and tap it, it will go and just completely fall all the way down. What's even more amazing is you can look at every piece of slate and see exactly where that chisel mark was made. You see all the striations from that piece of slate, and you go, oh, that's where the chisel was struck. Much like in ecclesia, after the split, you can see those striations and know exactly where the ecclesia was struck. Okay? That's why I'm telling you this little slate story. But it's really important for us to realize what can be done in these situations. Another matter is what happened when Solomon became king. He took over from his father. His father promised his mother, Bathsheba, that he would be king. And when he became king, he felt overwhelmed. And what did he actually ask for?
Well, I wasn't going to answer that, but he asked for wisdom.
He actually asked for discernment, and he was given wisdom, long life, power, and everything else. He's like, how can I judge this huge people of yours if you don't give me discernment? and the wisdom that came with it. So that was what was so important. Now, after he got this great wisdom, and God promised him what? What did he say about the kind of wisdom he would be given?
To judge the people.
Right. He said, no king will ever have the level of wisdom that you have been given in all through time, except for Christ. And that was the only other time in Scripture that was called the kingdom of God. First court case. What is the first court case he had to judge?
The baby's being cut in half.
Well, two prostitutes who were fighting over a baby and saying, no, it's mine, no, it's mine, no, it's mine, no, it's mine, back and forth. The dead baby is yours and the live baby is mine. And so what did he do to discern the truth? He applied pressure. It's what good lawyers and good doctors and good judges do. You apply pressure to find out where it really hurts. Like that piece of slate, where did the chisel strike the stone? And all of its striations will point right to it in the crack. So in this case, he applies the pressure. He applies that chisel to the slate, the sword to the baby, and all of a sudden it's known. What were the motives of the two different women? Yes,
One wants to preserve the life and the other one doesn't care about the life.
absolutely. I would put to you, this is the same thing that happens to an ecclesia. When there are those who push for their own agenda, do they love the baby and want to save it, or something else? And we really have to think hard about that, because I've seen it happen so many times in my lifetime, and I'm like, it's the same thing. The people who want to force their way usually can be the ones who don't care. Go ahead and cut the baby, because neither you nor I shall have it. And so with Solomon, it's very much like that, because we have to be good stewards of what we've been given and try to overcome. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the first occurrences we need to talk about as families and a family dynamic. There was a lot of different things at play, and we're gonna come back to that in just a moment with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There was a lot of family discernment, a lot of brokenness in the original first family that was so blessed. And in Abraham's family, there was the strife between Ishmael and Isaac, and that whole rift, and there was constant turmoil even in that family. Then the next generation down, you had two sons that really couldn't stand each other, Jacob and Esau, and there was favorites. Rebekah loved who? And who did Isaac love? Esau. So there was division in the family. There wasn't a lot of cohesiveness. And then it gets even worse when you get to Jacob's family with the 12 sons. You've got what happened to Dinah, and then what happened to Joseph, that he was sold into slavery. But the family never got along and never really recovered until they got back down to Egypt. So we're going to look at this one for just a minute, because Eli's sons is another prime example of a father not carrying out his duty with his children, okay? It's a hard lesson. It's not easy to swallow. But Eli was held accountable for his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Now, were Hophni and Phinehas teenagers? Were they toddlers? How old do you think they were when they both had wives and children? Right, at least in their 20s. But God held them accountable to Eli. I mean, it's like, I thought after 18, you're done. You have no culpability. Whatever they do is on them, right? So let's read this. It's in chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4 of 1 Samuel. And it's when Hannah is praying for Samuel and all that comes about. So can I get a reader for this one?
Samuel, 1 Samuel 2:12. Now the sons of Eli were useless men. They did not know the Lord, and this was the custom of the priest with the people. When everyone was offering a sacrifice, the priest's servants would come while the meat was cooking with a three-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. Everything that was on the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. They did so in Shiloh, and all of the Israelites who came there.
Okay, so the unfortunate thing is with these situations, everybody in Israel knew what was going on, because when they were making sacrifices, this is what they were doing. They would take the meat that they wanted first before it had been sacrificed or offered, or the fat had been offered up, and say, this is ours, which was completely illegal and sacrilegious to the Lord from all the offerings and what they were supposed to do as Levitical priests. So I guess we need to start there. They're from the tribe of Levi. They were ordained to do specific things. I want you to think back to two of Aaron's sons that offered a new incense to the Lord. How did that go? Anybody remember that story? Yeah, go ahead, Randy.
They were struck dead immediately.
Right. They were literally burned in the temple of the Lord. So this time you've got two who are doing this. Yes, go ahead, Jason.
Side question, not exactly related. Hopefully somebody smarter than me can answer this. The practice, it says, the custom of the priest putting the fork into the pot. I don't remember where in the law that is. I don't remember reading that.
They weren't supposed to do it. So
No,
it's not-
what happens is they would come in before this and they would take it, right? They would go in and take
Right.
for themselves what they were supposed to do, or what they wanted, so that it wasn't boiled, it was cooked in some other way. So that's further on down in 1 Samuel 2, what the sin that they had done. This part here wasn't exactly the sin.
No, it's coming.
Yeah.
It's the next
Further
slide.
on down is the sin, right? So, but even there, it's the custom of stabbing it while it's in the pot. I'm trying to remember, and I can't pinpoint it, where that custom was laid out.
I don't know the answer to
Yeah.
that. Well, good, Rob.
At this point, were they already starting to add traditional laws to the original law as they have throughout Jewish history?
I think they did it continuously and never really stopped. I mean, by the time we get to the time of Christ and the Pharisees, more than 500 had been added. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradually added.
It says it's the custom of the priests, so it was apparently something that kind of had been incorporated that wasn't necessarily outlined in the law, since we haven't seen it, right?
Yep, I think this was brought about because of what Hophni and Phinehas did. In other words, their influence over the other priests was so bad it was becoming a custom to the rest. Yes, Casey?
Yeah, but that's a good question. If this is only a custom and it was not or given in the law by God, then their breaking of this custom, how bad was that? Because it wasn't ordained by God.
Right.
So, well, no, but so what did they do wrong?
It's not in the law to do this. You're not allowed to take any of the meat until it has been sacrificed
no.
first.
No, that's just it. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that they were supposed to, nowhere in the law does it say that they were supposed to just randomly stick in a fork and what came up was theirs.
That's what I'm saying. That's all wrong and illegal. It isn't that part of sticking the fork in the meat, taking out what you want, isn't in the law. Am I not seeing what you're seeing, or what? Right. It became a custom because I think of his influence.
It is in Leviticus. Yeah. So it says, this is a weird version. Hang on a sec, hang on. Leviticus 7. It says, yeah, they are supposed to get some meat. So there's a few things. It says, priest shall burn the fat upon the altar, but the breast shall be Aaron and his sons, and the right shoulder shall you give to the priest for a heave offering. He among the sons of Aaron that offereth the blood of the peace offering, and the fat shall have the right shoulder for his part. For the wave breast and the heave shoulder have I taken and have given them unto Aaron and the priest and unto his sons by a statute forever. So there is some, I don't know the specifics.
They
but
were
there is-
allowed to have the meat. It was the order of it. So it had to be sacrificed first, then they could get the meat. The problem here is that Hophni and Phinehas wanted to have a grill bake out or whatever. I don't know how they wanted to prepare the meat, but they didn't want it boiled. So that's why they wanted to take the meat before it was offered to the Lord so they could cook it their own way. But the meat portions were allowed in Leviticus 7. The order was God first, then you. And what they're doing here with Eli's sons is they're taking of the meat before it was even offered to the Lord. So that's the issue as I see it. Does anybody else have another conception? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest's servants would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, give the priest meat for roasting, as he will not take cooked meat from you, only raw. So they wanted the raw meat so they could cook it the way they wanted to, and it was before it was offered to the Lord. And if the man said to him, and this is the one who brought the offering to the Lord, they must burn the fat first, then take as much as you desire. Then he would say, no, but you must give it to me now, and if not, I am taking it by force. That was the attitude of Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli. They were like, I don't care what you're doing, give us the meat now. We want it raw so that we can cook it the way we want to. And so the sin of this young man was very great before the Lord, and the men treated the offering of the Lord disrespectfully. So, yes.
I finally locked it down in my head. He was literally robbing this man of his sacrifice.
Yes.
If he was bringing a 5-pound roast or whatever, they took 3 pounds, and all he had left was 2 pounds to offer. So they're robbing him, and they're robbing God.
Yes.
That's the seriousness of it in my mind. So.
Absolutely, you nailed it on the head. They're robbing the person who's giving the offering, and they're robbing the Lord. So it was the issue that Eli's two sons had not been corrected by their father Eli and were negatively influencing the community and corrupting the sacrifices that were being brought to the temple. So all three of those are at play. So then we go to 1 Samuel 3. If you want to flip over in your Bible, you can see all that's going on. When God calls for Samuel, 3 times he goes to Eli. The third time he says, when the Lord speaks to you again, say, it's your servant, speak, for I'm listening. And then it says, then the Lord came and stood and called as the other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, speak, for your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I am going to do a thing in Israel, and both the ears of everyone who hears about it will ring. Does that sound like a small punishment or something absolutely major? On that day, I will carry out against Eli everything I have spoken in regards to his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am going to judge his house forever for the wrongdoing he knew about, because his sons were bringing a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the wrongdoing of Eli's house shall never be atoned for by offering. Now, we often say the Lord can forgive everything. In this case, he said, there is no atonement for Hophni and Phinehas for what they did. They were also doing what else in the temple? There were several other things that they were up to. Go ahead, Randy.
And they were laying with the women that came to offer sacrifices.
Yeah. So what they were doing was adopting the customs of the pagan cultures around them, where they had temple shrine prostitutes. And here the women who were bringing offerings to the Lord, they were, I hate to say it, but they were basically raping. So it was unbelievable the crimes that had been brought up to them, and Eli did nothing about it except say, "Stop doing this." Yes.
Kind of goes back to our memory verse this morning that God knows our heart. He knows our thoughts, and he knew their heart, and then it was no good in it. So that's why it's like, I'm not gonna, this is not gonna stand, and I'm not gonna, this is gonna be I'm gonna rebuke you. That's gonna be the end of it. So he knew their heart.
Exactly. From the beginning. Yeah, Casey.
I think related to that, God also knew that Eli must have been just tremendously torn.
Tremendously what?
Torn.
Okay.
Because he doesn't punish Eli directly. Eli remains priest for the rest of his life. And so I think there's a lot of grace that was given to Eli, though his sons were punished and Eli bore the brunt of that. He wasn't punished directly himself, which I think really speaks to God's mercy toward us when we find ourselves in a very, very personally challenging situation. Not that we then use that to say, I know God will forgive me. Right? But
Right.
he will.
Great, thank you, Casey. Jason?
There's a back instance here too with not only Eli, but Samuel, right? Samuel has a couple sons, and nearly the same thing happens, right? Samuel's sons are wicked, just like
exactly.
Eli's sons were wicked. And God holds Samuel's sons account more than Samuel himself. Same thing here. Eli's sons account more than Eli himself. But I mean, Eli did suffer some consequences.
Well, he did, because the whole household was
Yeah.
basically begging for a priestly office so they could eat after this happened. It was really bad. But you're right, the same thing befell Samuel because he did not rebuke or deal with his two sons. Roger.
Well, I think in the end, Eli fell and broke his neck, and I don't think that was an unfortunate accident. I believe that was the Lord's doing, that he broke his neck. I mean, he pretty much lost his salvation in that moment.
And that was the same day that the Ark of the Lord had been captured by the Philistines, and the same day that Hophni and Phinehas were killed, and the same day that this child to Hophni, I believe, was born, named Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel. So, and we don't find out till we get to the Kings what happened to the rest of the family of Eli. That era, the time of King Saul and King David, it basically describes the end of the house of Eli, which is quite fascinating. So we're going to take a little moment and look at Jacob's life and him directing his very volatile family, very difficult and very unwieldy, because he had 4 wives. So Leah bore him 6 children, and all the other ones, Bilhah and, well, help me out here. I know Leah and then Zelpah, all bore him 2. But the family was very divided and kind of fractious. And one of the incidences that's really interesting was when the incident happened with Dinah. It's Jacob kind of waffles and he doesn't do anything about what has happened, right? And so who goes and takes care of business in the family? Right, Simeon and Levi, and they make this pact with the people who claim they want to marry their sister and have already violated her. And it's like, we can't marry you unless you're circumcised. They get circumcised, and then they go in 3 days later and kill all the men and take all the property and the women and children and everything else out of there. So Jacob was very angry about that incident, which is shocking to me because, in my mind, they kind of did the right thing by executing justice, although it was very renegade kind of justice. So, but what did Levi say about Simeon and Levi? Yes, Randy.
He said, shall they treat our sister as a harlot?
Yeah, that was Simeon and Levi, but Jacob was all upset because he thought that all the other country would come against him and try to kill him and his family. And that's why he was so angry and upset. But it follows through when you get to their judgments at the end of their life. And what I want to do is compare these two blessings from Jacob and also from Moses, because they're not identical and they're different as we go through time. I'm just going to take 5 more minutes because I know we're out of time practically. Can someone read the left-hand side and the right-hand side for this? And this is their calling to get together.
Jacob's blessing says, then Jacob called his sons and said, gather around, and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Come together and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. Moses says, this is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, gave the Israelites before his death. He said, the Lord came from Sinai and appeared to them from Seir. He shone on them from Mount Paran and came with 10,000 holy ones, with lightning in his right hand for them. Indeed, he loves the people. All your holy ones are in your hand, and they assemble at your feet. Each receives your words. Moses gave us instruction, a possession for the assembly of Jacob. So he became king in Jeshurun when the leaders of the people gathered with the tribes of Israel.
Thank you very much. So in the first case, it was just the family who heard it. And in Moses' case, it's the entire nation that hears these blessings, just to sort of get us off the track. So the first one is the tribe of Reuben. Now, he was the firstborn. Does anybody know who became the firstborn after Reuben's defeat? Yes, Randy. Right, it was Joseph, and it was picked out. That's picked out not till you get to Chronicles. You don't know that until you get there. It doesn't tell you in the book of Genesis. So can I get a reader for this slide?
Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the firstfruits of my fertility, excelling in prominence, excelling in power. Turbulent as water, you will no longer excel because you got into your father's bed and you defiled it. He got into my bed. And then Moses, let Reuben live and not die, though his people become few.
So it's interesting that both of these cases are wrought by sexual infidelity. So it was basically after Leah died, no, not Leah, Rachel died, that Reuben went to Bilhah and bedded down with her. And that caused him not to be the firstborn chosen anymore. And the second one, when Reuben is basically said by Moses, may they not die out, what had just happened before Moses dies? Baal of Peor is a clue. It was the Reubenite tribe that was almost wiped out because of Baal of Peor and the Moabite women coming in and inviting the men to come and sacrifice with them. So remember, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, comes with a spear because the whole nation is mourning. Moses and the elders are sitting there basically weeping over what's going on. And Cosby, who is from one of the tribes of Moab, and Zimri, who was the son of the leader of the tribe of Reuben, basically went into the tent to do their business right in front of the elders. And Phinehas comes with a spear and turns him into a shish kebab. He basically runs the spear right through the middle of them. And I think over 20,000 died in the tribe of Reuben. So they almost were wiped out. In both cases, it's the same problem going on in the tribe of Reuben. So Jacob gives his prognostication about it, and so does Moses, and they pretty much match. So we'll do this one last one, and then we'll stop. Can I get a reader for Simeon and Levi? Because he combines both of them. In both cases, Simeon and Levi are tied together.
Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their Knives are vicious weapons. May I never enter their council. May I never join in their assembly, for in their anger they kill men, and on a whim they hamstrung oxen. Their anger is cursed, for it is strong, and their fury, for it is cruel. I will disperse them throughout Jacob and scatter them throughout Israel.
We'll stop there for 1 second. So that's what I think is so interesting. Jacob's so angry about this, even up unto his deathbed. But God kind of uses it for a blessing. So Simeon winds up being an enclave inside of Judah, which envelops the tribe of Simeon. And Levi is spread around through the country, but they're the ones that inherit the goodness of the land in the tenth that the people provide. So it's interesting that God kind of takes from the ashes of Jacob's curse these roses that grow out of it, that they're able to do this. You want to read the other side for Moses?
He said about Levi, your Thummim and your Urim belong to your faithful one. You tested him at Massa and contended with him at the waters of Meribah. He said about his father and mother, I do not regard them. He disregarded his brothers and didn't acknowledge his sons, for they kept your word and maintained your covenant. They will teach your ordinances to Jacob and your instructions to Israel, and they will set incense before you and your whole burnt offerings on your altar. Lord, bless his possessions and accept the work of his hands. Smash, does that say smash?
Yeah.
Smash the loins of his adversaries and enemies so that they cannot rise again.
So if you think about it, Levi's always the one who stands up for the Lord in almost all the cases. So we'll pick up with this next week. Thank you all for your time.